I'm John McLeese, and this is Bold Radio. Sometimes in life, you just need some good advice. No one is an expert at absolutely everything. That's why we're proud to present the Bold Radio Expert Series, where we welcome a qualified and experienced individual to offer sound advice on an aspect of running a business. Our guest today is a highly qualified human resource expert. Very pleased to be joined by Mike Cuma, who is also representing the Human Resource Management Association of Manitoba. Mike is Vice President of Human Resources at Qualico, and he'll bring his expertise today on the subject of investigating a workplace incident. In the real world, folks, no one gets a timeout and no one misses a recess. Confrontations or incidents in the workplace are dealt with much differently. Human resources is a required skill to investigate the issues diplomatically and employ effective strategies in conflict resolution. Mike, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, John.
It's great to see you again. What are the first things that someone should be considering before even starting a workplace investigation?
The very first thing is to look at what policies might exist in the workplace and what policies need to be considered. Then we need to ask, who's going to be conducting the investigation? What person, what role, what specialty in the organization should do that? Then we look at how and when the investigation's to be conducted. What's the timeline for it? These things can't go on forever. They have to be done in a relatively short time. We need to look at the scope of the investigation. Just exactly how far is this investigation going to go? And then, of course, we will gather information and records and documents and evidence. How are they going to be retained? And how is confidentiality going to be maintained? Those are the first things we look at before we even start.
It's a big bucket to be what you've just identified. What would be the starting point of an investigation? You know, something serious in the workplace.
It happens all the time. The very first step is a complaint. And a person will raise a complaint. That needs to be expressed in writing, and we need to consolidate that and get it in a clear statement as to what exactly the person's alleging to have occurred. We also want to ask them what their wishes are in the circumstance. We need to understand what the complainant's looking for in the complaint.
Does every complaint that goes on in the workplace get investigated, or should they be investigated?
Well, no, they shouldn't, and some people may not understand or appreciate that. Once a complaint's in written form, the organization or the investigator has to assess whether it indeed warrants investigation. Does it indicate or suggest a violation of a policy, a rule, a piece of legislation or regulation? So first we have to look at that. We also have to consider, is the complaint of any preliminary substance? By that I mean, is it frivolous? Does it have on the surface some real bite to it?
So what happens to the complainant, the person that's making the complaint, and the respondent, the person that I guess is being involved in the complaint, while an investigation is underway? Yeah,
that's a good question. The very first thing is we have to assume that everybody's innocent in the process until we get facts that suggest otherwise. And so typically we have to look at the severity of the circumstance. It may well be that given the nature of the incident, the respondent or the person who's alleged to have caused the incident may need to be reassigned, moved, conceivably may be suspended or removed from the workplace or placed on leave during the investigation.
Let's talk about the sequence of the investigation. You talked about all the different components of it, but what's sort of some of the sequencing that can happen, and what kind of time frame should exist between the start and the decision point and the conclusion of an investigation?
Right. Well, there is a proven path. The very first step is to talk to the complainant, understand the complaint, get their wishes and their statement. Then we next go to the witnesses that the complainant suggested observed, saw, or may have seen what happened. Once we've done that, then we deal with the respondent, and we talk to the respondent, let them know what in fact accusations are leveled against them, what their response might be, and if there's any witnesses they may wish to come forth, and we would identify them. We would then go to the fifth step, which is we would do follow-up interviews where the evidence suggests we need more information from this party or that person to get the full story.
So once all the information, all the interviews are completed and the information is collected, gathered, and analyzed, what happens next?
Well, then the investigator has to file and establish a written report. They have to answer the questions. What were the facts of this circumstance? And they have to make some judgments on that based on evidence, fact, and law. They need to do that. They need to make a written report as to what they found and provide that to the business leaders, if that's the owner of the company, the executive of the company, and provide that information of their findings so that the owners or the leaders of the business can make an intelligent decision as to what the outcome of that complaint should be.
If an investigation determines wrongdoing or a policy violation, how does an employer determine the appropriate response?
Well, the appropriate response has to be based on the severity of the finding. So if we find that there was inappropriate conduct or behavior, was it of a serious nature, was it perhaps of a moderate nature, or was it of a lesser nature? And based on the severity, an appropriate response to that is made. So jaywalking, you don't go to jail for. Same thing.
Right. So, the punishment has to fit the crime, so to speak.
Very much so.
In this case. Does an investigator determine what should be done? Does the person that's investigating it recommend the consequences?
Usually not. Usually the investigator's role is to find the facts, to ascertain the evidence, to do a comprehensive job, to make sure the investigation follows sound procedural requirements, and then to present the facts to the decision makers. It's then up to the decision maker, if that's the executive of the company or the owners of the company, to decide what the response should be.
What is the range of a typical or likely company responses in finding of wrongdoing or policy violation? Just to give our listeners an example.
Yeah. A response can range from a very, I'll call a minor, a verbal warning, a written warning, right through to various suspensions, right through to termination of employment. So there can be serious consequences. But a finding can also include the requirement to train, to coach, to educate managers or employees, or to give them different resources and tools. So it can be a punitive response. It can also be a corrective, a more proactive or positive corrective response.
Mike Cuma, he is the Vice President of Human Resources with Qualico, and he is here today representing the Human Resource Management Association of Manitoba. He's an expert in investigating workplace incidents, something that's very important and has to be done correctly. Bold Radio experts. Thanks, Mike.